All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the joint processing of CalFresh applications by SSA and the County Welfare Department's webinar. This is Alexis Fernandez, Chief of the CalFresh Policy Bureau here at the Department of Social Services, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Later on, we'll also be joined by the Code for America team for a demo of the Get CalFresh application tool for SSA technicians. So before we get started, let's go over some logistical details. So this webinar is going to be held in listen-only mode, which means that all lines are muted during the live presentation, and there are two ways that you can connect to the audio, via phone or via your computer with instructions on the right-hand side of your screen in the control panel. Since we are all muted, you can ask questions during the webinar by typing your questions into the question pane, again on the control panel anytime during the presentation. We'll answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but do encourage you to send those in throughout the presentation as they come up, and we'll do our best to address as many as possible. The slides and the webinar recording will be posted to the Expanding CalFresh training webpage as well, so you can come back and review these materials as needed. All right, so with that, let's review our agenda. During our time together, we'll go over some background information on the upcoming, it almost feels like it's just a few days away, the upcoming expansion of CalFresh and introduce the concept of joint processing of CalFresh applications. We'll then dive into the policies, starting with SSA informing and screening, reviewing the SSA procedures for providing application assistance, and we'll cover policies and procedures for the County Welfare Department processing of applications received from SSA. We're going to wrap up with a demo of what I'm calling kind of the SSA edition of getcalfresh.org, highlighting the changes that Code for America has made to adapt the tool for SSA use. And this will provide you the information you need to get a sense of how this process will roll out for your clients. Okay, and then one more thing before I begin. I want to highlight the key resource on this topic that if you haven't already read, I would encourage you to take a look at. It's All County Letter 1944. It was just released on May 8th. And it provides policy guidance on the topic of joint processing. Everything covered on today's webinar is also addressed in the letter. So if you're looking for some exciting weekend reading, ACL 1944 is for you. Okay, let's get started with some background info. So as we all know, because we are already receiving applications, starting on June 1st, 2019, older adults and people with disabilities receiving SSI may be eligible for CalFresh. We're not going to go into detail regarding the policy change here because I assume you've been on all the other webinars and have heard it in depth, but I will leave you with a link to our Expanding CalFresh webpage where you can find a lot more information regarding implementation, policy guidance, and more. So please visit that website if you want to catch up on details regarding the expansion of CalFresh. So let's start with an introduction to quote-unquote joint processing. Under federal SNAP regulations, so these are the federal regulations that our program operates under, that CalFresh operates under, SNAP applications will be jointly processed by the Social Security Administration and the state agency, which in California means the County Welfare Department, for a limited number of applicants. Those applicants are households that include only SSI applicants or recipient members and are conducting business at the SSA office. SSA technicians will assist these households with completing and submitting a CalFresh application, whether they're being assisted by the SSA in an office or over the telephone. So basically, while an individual is at the SSA office completing business with the SSA, typically a SSI application, an SSI renewal, or whatever else they may be doing with SSA, the SSA will offer to assist the household with submitting and completing a CalFresh application. That is what we are talking about when we say joint processing of CalFresh applications. There is a national memorandum of understanding between the SSA and the Food and Nutrition Service that applies in all states and explains the SNAP-related services that the SSA will provide. A copy of the MOU was released with HCL 1944, which I just mentioned, and guidance provided in this webinar is based on that MOU and federal SNAP regulations. I just want to emphasize this is an MOU that was around long before we introduced this concept in California, and that is because we were a cash-out state since 1974. So as a cash-out state, we were not subject to this national memorandum of understanding, but now that we are reversing that policy, we're expanding CalFresh to SSI recipients, we are subject to these joint processing procedures, as are all other states in the country. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to highlight a couple of California-specific decisions that we've made. For example, the use of an online application assistance tool. Those are unique to California. They've been approved by the the Food and Nutrition Service, FNS, and we've agreed to these procedures with SSA, but you won't necessarily see them mentioned in the national MOU because the national MOU was written long before we had things like online applications. So today we're going to highlight what those differences are as we go through our slide deck. So just important reminders before we get into the nitty-gritty. SSA joint processing applies only to households that are conducting business with SSA, such as applying for SSI, households that include only SSI applicant or recipient members, and households that are not already receiving CalFresh unless their recertification is due. And we're going to talk about that later in the slideshow. But I want to take a moment to emphasize that the joint processing procedures we are discussing today narrowly apply to those households that are conducting business with SSA and include only SSI applicant or recipient members. All right, so now that we have some background on joint processing, let's dive into the SSA-specific duties. We're going to start by reviewing the SSA responsibilities regarding informing households and screening households for application assistance. Later on, we'll get into how these duties transfer over to the county welfare department, but today, or rather right now, let's talk about SSA informing and screening. Okay. So whenever a member of a household consisting of SSI applicants or recipient members conducts business with SSA, the SSA technician that's assisting them will inform them of two things: their right to apply for SNAP benefits at the SSA office without going to a local county welfare department office, and their right to apply with the county welfare department instead if they choose to do so. So these two informing bullets, if you will, are specified in the federal regulations, so they're pulled directly from the federal regulations. And this is like the basics of what the SSA technician has to tell the client, that they will help them apply, but that they can also go to an office if that's what they would prefer to, or not just an office. They can go online, they can call in by phone, it is modern times, but they can apply with their county welfare department if they would prefer. In addition to informing, the SSA will conduct a screening. And again, the screening is based on federal regulations and the national MOU, but basically the SSA technician will screen households to determine their current CalFresh or SNAP status and whether they are interested in applying for CalFresh with SSA's assistance. So let's take a look at the screening questions that the SSA technicians will ask. These screening questions are built into the paper application for SSA, as well as the online eligibility system for SSA. So regardless of where the SSA technician is located, the system will prompt them to ask these 4 questions. These 4 questions are basically national questions that we've quote-unquote turned on in California. And so you'll see on this slide, we replaced the word SNAP with CalFresh for the purposes of our webinar, but as noted in the ACL, the SSA technician may refer to the program as SNAP until they get into the process of actually assisting the client and they are prompted with the name of the program in the state for which the individual resides. Hopefully, if it's an SSA technician in California helping a resident of California, the program name CalFresh would be more likely to be referenced. So the SSA technician will screen households for potential CalFresh eligibility by asking the following 4 questions. 1, are you currently receiving CalFresh benefits? 2, have you received a recertification notice in the last 30 days? 3, have you applied for CalFresh benefits in the last 60 days? And then number 4 is a sub-question of number 3, have you received an unfavorable CalFresh decision? So specifically, if you've applied in the last 60 days, were you denied when you applied? So if the household is either not receiving CalFresh or receiving CalFresh but needs to complete their recertification, or recently applied for SNAP or CalFresh but was determined ineligible, and the household includes only SSI applicant or recipient members, the SSA technician will then proceed to ask the household if I can take your SNAP application or CalFresh application today, and that's when the assistance process will start. So let me just hit pause here because you may be asking, well, what happens if the SSA technician is working with an SSI applicant or recipient that lives in a household that includes non-SSI members? The households that include both SSI and non-SSI members will not pass the quote-unquote screening, and the SSA technician will then refer the household to a couple of options for application assistance. GetCalFresh.org or benefitscal.org for an online application. That is kind of the recommended approach. Encourage people to apply online because they can complete the process over the phone and out of the office in so many counties across California. And then if they're still interested in going to the county office in person, then the SSA technicians will use the Find an Office online tool that you are all very familiar with to help the individual identify the closest office to their residence. So there is a method for assisting these households that include both SSI and non-SSI members, but today's webinar is primarily going to focus on those households who are eligible for SSA assistance because of their responses to the 4 questions. So if the SSA applicant or recipient quote-unquote passes the screening, the SSA technician will ask, can I take your CalFresh application today? And if the client says yes, this is when the SSA technician begins the process of assisting the household with completing and submitting the CalFresh application. Okay, so let's transition to SSA's application assistance procedures. How will SSA technicians help these individuals with completing and submitting an application? The good news is that we have moved into the modern era and we are going to default to a method of assisting the household with submitting an online CalFresh application. So the CDSS and SSA have agreed with FNS approval to use the GetCalFresh.org application assistance tool as the default method for SSA submission of CalFresh applications. So this will be the go-to way to help individuals apply for CalFresh. An important note, SSA technicians will be using an SSA-specific edition of GetCalFresh.org, We're going to have a demo later on in the webinar, but I want to make sure that this is very clear because we kind of have heard some rumblings after the letter was issued. But this is not the regular getcalfresh.org website that's available to the public today. It is a special version. We're going to walk through it on our demo, and it will only be accessible to SSA technicians. Here are a couple highlights that you'll see demoed. It's a special site. It's only for SSA technicians. Language throughout the site and the legal pages have been updated to reflect that it is an SSA technician that is assisting the household. And most importantly, CDSS and SSA have agreed with FNS approval that the SSA technician can electronically sign on behalf of the household when submitting the application. So this is really important if the SSA technician is helping the client over the phone or even in an office environment where the SSA technician is the one moving the client through the online app. The language has been changed and we've sought approval so that the SSA technician can sign on behalf of the household. This is the signature for the application. So when you receive this application, you will consider it a signed CalFresh application. No additional signatures will be necessary. We are a single signature program, and you have received a signed application from getcalfresh.org that happened to be submitted with SSA assistance. So that single signature note is pretty important. So lots of folks have asked, well, what are the advantages of going online versus paper? And I just wanted to give folks some insights on how we landed on this approach. So the benefits of using getcalfresh.org versus our paper application is that we've limited questions to those that apply to households with only SSI applicant or recipient members. So we'd really focus on this narrow population that is eligible for this assistance. There will be no additional time between SSA completion of the application, which is the beginning date of aid, and we'll get to that in just a minute, and the submission of the application to the CWD. So this ensures real-time submission, just like a regular online application. If we had stayed in the paper world, there could have been a lag between the time that the SSA technician submitted, or rather, received the signed application and then turned around and submitted it to the CWDs via fax. And we heard from other states that there could be days between those two things happening, and we definitely don't want any lag between when we receive the application and the beginning date of aid. That would not be good for our timeliness. So the CWDs, or the counties, will receive the application like any other getcalfresh.org application. We'll talk a little bit later on in the webinar about how you will identify that it came from SSA. And then there's really no need for the SSA technician to route the paper application to the correct county because getCalFresh does that built in. One of the concerns we had with having 58 counties in California is that the SSA technicians would inadvertently send the paper applications to the wrong county. So this avoids that as well. And then just a note here that a paper application will always still be an option if it's requested by the applicant or if for whatever reason a backup method is needed. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but the getcalfresh.org approach is really the default method with paper as a backup. So let's just spend a minute on the paper application backup process. So if a household requests to submit a paper CalFresh application, then the SSA technician will assist the household with completing and submitting a CS-285. They will submit the signed paper application to the appropriate county. Technically, the requirement is within 1 business day of receiving the signed application, and they have fax numbers for all the 58 counties, so these will come in primarily via fax. And they will include a standard cover sheet that's used nationally. It's called the Social Security Administration Transmittal for SNAP Applications, the SSA 4233, which you can Google if you're interested in. But it's a cover sheet that they will place on top of the paper application before faxing it through so that you, the county, know it came from the Social Security Administration. So after the SSA technician provides the household with assistance in completing and submitting the application, whether it's on getcalfresh.org or by paper, the technician must then give the client the new document. It's called the CF-SSA-1, Information for Households Applying for CalFresh with the Social Security Administration. So this is a basically information sheet, though it's multiple pages long, providing the client with some required information, which we're going to walk through right now. This new CF-SSA-1 must tell the client at a minimum the following information per the federal regulations: how to contact their county, how to complete the CalFresh application process, must tell them that they will be notified about their CalFresh eligibility within 30 days, and it kind of reminds them, if you have not heard back in 30 days, please check with your county, not with SSA. It outlines their rights and responsibilities, and it tells the household how and where to obtain an EBT card and PIN, how to use their EBT card, and what can be purchased with EBT. So I'm going to show a couple of visuals of the new form that was just completed and made available to the Social Security Administration. So a little fuzzy here, but you can find it online. Basically, this form is a multi-page. As I just stated, it starts with basic information about, you've applied for CalFresh, what's next? It emphasizes that the process continues with the county, not with the Social Security Administration. Provides them info about how they can contact their county office using the state phone line, which will connect them to their county based on their zip code, as well as the Find a County Office tool, so again, routing them to the right county. It provides the basic EBT info, and then we went a little bit above and beyond the federal requirements to tell the household a little bit of info on how they can keep their CalFresh benefits, emphasizing the IRT, SAR 7, CF 37, and we'll go to the next page here. Goes on to give the rights and responsibilities and some of the required anti-discrimination information. And so the idea here is you've completed the submission of your application with SSA. You need enough information to know that your county will complete the process after this, and some kind of basic expectation setting if their application can be processed without additional contact from the county, because as we'll talk about on the next few slides, there are some differences here for county welfare department processing of these applications, which is a great transition to our next section. So the Social Security Administration has assisted the client with completing and submitting their application. They've provided them the CalFresh information sheet, the CF-SSA-1, and now we transition to what the county welfare departments will do in terms of processing these SSA-assisted applications. Okay. When the county receives an SSA-assisted application from getcalfresh.org, you will be able to identify the application as SSA-assisted. More to come on that in the demo. Again, the application is signed, so the county must not require an additional signature. When the CWD then, this next set of rules applies to either getCalFresh or paper. So when you receive any application from SSA, the household may be categorically eligible. We're going to talk about who that applies to. And no interview is required. So I'm going to hit pause on this no interview is required because I've heard all kinds of different understandings of who has to be interviewed, who doesn't have to be interviewed. Let me just emphasize that the no interview requirement only applies to SSA-assisted applications. So any other household that applies with the county without SSA assistance, whether they are SSI and non-SSI or only SSI, they must continue to be interviewed. no interview requirement only applies to SSA-assisted applications. Primarily, you will receive those through getcalfresh.org with the indicator that it's SSA-assisted. You may also receive them through fax, paper application with the cover sheet, but only those SSA-assisted applications require no interview. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides. So let's start with categorical eligibility. So just some reminders here. Households in which all members receive or are authorized to receive SSI are categorically eligible for CalFresh. Categorical eligibility means that certain preliminary eligibility requirements have already been met by participating in another low-income program. So in this case, because you are already receiving SSI, we already know that you are a low-income household, and we already know certain things about your household. And so you are considered categorically eligible for CalFresh. We talked about some of these preliminary eligibility factors. What are they exactly? The factors that have already been deemed by the other assistance program include resources, gross and net income, Social Security number, sponsored immigrant information, and residency. Now, even if a household is categorically eligible, you, the CWD, must do the work to determine their benefit level. So you're still going to need some info. Most commonly from these households, the exact income information to determine the benefit amount, not to determine whether they pass the gross and net income test. And then I just want to remind folks, categorical eligibility does not result in automatic eligibility. It means the household is likely eligible for CalFresh, but again, you still need to determine the household's benefit level. So here's where we connect back to these SSA-assisted applications and where things get a little tricky. So we're going to go through a couple of slides on this. Not all SSA-assisted applications are households that are categorically eligible. Remember, SSA technicians can assist households where everyone is an SSA applicant, everyone is an SSA recipient, or everyone is either an SSA applicant or SSI recipient. The key word here is that only households where everyone is an SSI recipient are categorically eligible. So let's look at this another way. So let's start at the top of our chart here. Household type. If all members applied for SSI, can the household apply for CalFresh at the SSA office? Yes. Is the household categorically eligible for CalFresh? No, because again, all the members applied for SSI. They did not receive SSI. Next household type. All members receiving SSI. Can the household apply for CalFresh at the SSA office? Yes. Is the household categorically eligible for CalFresh? Yes. Again, all members receiving. Next household type. All members receiving or applied for SSI. Can they apply for CalFresh at the SSA office? Yes. Are they categorically eligible? No, because they have a mix of those people who are receiving and who've applied. The last household type is only some members are receiving or applied for SSI. Can they apply for CalFresh at SSA? No, they cannot. SSA will refer them to their county. And is the household eligible or categorically eligible? No, because again, there's a mix of members that are receiving or applying for CalFresh. So really here, the important thing to remember is that some of these applications will be categorically eligible, some will not. So even though you receive them for SSA, you are still going to need to make an assessment as to whether you've received it from SSA from an SSA applicant or an SSI recipient. If it's an SSI recipient, all members are SSI recipients, then they will be categorically eligible, and you should apply those methods when determining their eligibility. So let's go to the next important kind of unique policy. No interview for applications received from SSA. So I'm like a broken record, I'm gonna say it 10 times so we all hear the same thing. So households whose CalFresh applications are processed under SSA joint processing procedures will not be required to go to a CWD office or otherwise be subject to an interview. The quote-unquote no interview requirement applies only to SSA-assisted applications. We went over that several times, so I won't beat a dead horse, but again, only to SSA-assisted applications. And then there's the important note that all other newly eligible SSI-only households or households with both SSI and non-SSI members must be interviewed per usual. Let's talk about the details of this no interview requirement, because I'm sure you're asking yourself, well, what if I really do need to talk to this household? What if something's wrong with the application? The CWD is not allowed to contact the household for an interview to complete the eligibility determination unless, one, the application is improperly completed, so you definitely need more info from them to process that correctly. Mandatory verification is missing. So a common example of that might be that you see in the SSA assisted application that someone has indicated they have earned income. Earned income is not super popular amongst SSI recipients, but it's possible that they do have earned income, and that is an eligibility factor that you are mandated to verify. So you will have to follow up with that household to find or to seek out that mandatory verification. Or if you determine that information on the application is questionable. So again, you have some wiggle room here to follow up with the household to obtain information that you need to complete the eligibility determination, but the household will not be required to show up for or complete an interview over the phone in order to complete the eligibility determination. As well, CWDs may contact the household, not for an interview, but just proactive outreach, if you will, to determine whether the household incurs expenses that, if verified, may increase benefits. So this proactive outreach to increase benefits, very likely what you would be reaching out for are verification of medical expenses because they indicated that they have those medical expenses and those must be verified in order to claim the deduction. If you are a county that verifies shelter and the household has shelter expenses, that would be proactive outreach to increase benefits. Now I'm trying to think what's the third one. I always forget it. Expenses, medical expenses, shelter, and shoot, I am blanking now. We will get back to this. But there are anything that would increase benefits that needs to be verified. You can do proactive outreach. Now, if you as the county are not able to contact the client at this initial phase, remember that a household can claim a deduction at any time. And I do now remember that the third category is dependent care, if the household is, if a member is seeking employment. Okay, so I touched on the topic of mandatory verification, and you're probably thinking, well, what could be that mandatory verification? So the CWD must ensure that mandatory information is verified prior to determining initial eligibility. Remember, though, that you must also follow existing expedited service rules that allow the verification requirement to be postponed. So this makes no changes to the ES processing rules. The most common mandatory verification for this population is unearned income, including the SSI payment amount. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how you can electronically verify that SSI payment amount so that you are not caught seeking verifications, not getting a response, and unable to make an eligibility determination. So the highly preferred method for verifying SSI, SSP payment information is through the use of the SSA provided State Data Exchange and Bendex, the Beneficiary Data Exchange data. That data is available to counties in MEDS on the INQX screen. It is considered verified upon receipt because it is straight from the source, SSA. So this is the best electronic verification that is available to counties specifically for the SSI, SSP payment verification. And, you know, if used, could really reduce the number of requests going out to households to verify information that you already have available to you and is considered verified upon receipt. So do take a look at that letter for more details on this, but again, that SSI, SSP paid amount is the key data element that can help with completing an eligibility determination for these cases. So once you've received the app, you have not conducted an interview because it's SSA assisted, you've kind of figured out are they categorically eligible or not, you have verified their SSI payment information via MEDS, you have proactively reached out if there's an indication in the online application that, for example, the household has medical expenses, there's earned income that needs to be verified, you've kind of settled all that. What are your processing timelines as a county welfare department in terms of making eligibility determinations? So the CWD, as for other cases, will make an eligibility determination and issue benefits within 30 days following, and this is what's special here, the date the signed application is received by SSA. So in other words, the beginning date of aid is the date the SSA receives the signed application. So when you're using getcalfresh.org, this will be the same date that the application is received by the county welfare department because it's online, it's kind of real time, and that's why that really is the preferred method. If you receive a paper application via fax, you have to go back to the date the application was received by SSA, not the date it was received by the county. Expedited service processing timelines start, again, this is the unique factor, the date the county receives the SSI or the application from SSA signed. So 30 days begins when SSA gets the signed application, but 3 days begins when you, the county, receive the signed application. So at least there's that to avoid delays for those who are in an emergency situation. So with that, I want to hand it over to our friends at Code for America to walk through the Get CalFresh demo. They're going to highlight some unique features as related to SSA processing, and then when we are done with the demo, we'll also have time for question and answer. So give me a second here to transfer the screen to Code for America. Okay, Caitlin, we can see your screen, and let me just check if we can hear you.
Hi everyone, thank you for the invitation to join today.
Perfect, take it away.
Great, and I am joined by my colleague and Senior Product Manager, Simone Sequeira, who will be running through the demo. Before we get started, we just wanted to call out or start with 5 key differences for the SSA edition version of Get CalFresh. We'll walk through these 5 differences, take about 10 minutes or so to go through the demo, and then specifically talk through how each county or consortia will be able to identify those SSA-assisted applications. So first, Code for America, we created a unique URL and authentication code for SSA agents who are assisting with a CalFresh application. This unique URL is only available to SSA, but also wanted to add an additional layer of security to ensure that only SSA-assisted applications were being submitted through this edition. We also heard concerns from a couple of our county partners across the state around SSA being able to submit a minimal application. And we have removed that option based on, again, conversation with our county partners and also CDFS to ensure that the SSA agents are gathering enough information throughout that application process. We also, two key differences that you will see is that we also removed all of the CalFresh interview language throughout the application to really help set the client's expectations that they will not have to complete that CalFresh interview, but they may still be contacted by the county in case the county has any questions to follow up with. We also updated the legal page along with the client's signature to reflect that it is the SSA agent who is clicking on those buttons, and Simone will walk through that experience in just a moment. And then finally, all applicants will receive a text or email with their application confirmation number, so that's the C4 number, CalWIN number, or LRS number as well. So with that, I'm going to switch my screen. Just give me one moment here. And now we will walk through the demo of Get CalFresh. So let me turn things over to Simone.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. As Taylor mentioned, my name is Simone Sequeira, and I'm the Senior Product Manager for Get CalFresh. And I'll start with the demo. So if you want to see this demo yourself and walk through it yourself, you can go to demo.getcalfresh.org/SSA, and the code to get into the experience on the demo site is 1234. So we have created a special link for SSA that we'll be sharing with them, and we'll be giving them their own code that they will use on a quarterly basis. But you can go to the demo site yourself anytime. Okay, so there are several changes that we've made to the kind of traditional Get CalFresh application. Some of it is coming from SSA directly, and some of it was worked together with Alexis around the policy for how we're going to be processing these applications together. So the first portion comes from SSA, which is essentially a waiver on SSA's part, letting the client know that they will be using getcalfresh.org, which is not an SSA website, and that they have the option to choose a paper application. We have our typical how CalFresh works entry point. The difference with this is that we have removed references to the interview throughout the application. So here we just have the 3 steps: submit the application, submit proof, and get an EBT card. We no longer have reference to the interview on this page. Okay, so I will choose Alameda County, because that's where I live. All right, and so for the purposes of this demo, we'll assume that this is a single person, SSI only household. Okay, and in this case, we've updated our option to say received or has applied for SSI/SSP, which acknowledges that the SSA will be assisting both people who have applied for SSI and people who are currently receiving it. And we have kept in all of the income questions just to acknowledge that since there's no required interview that the counties will be doing, we want to collect as much information as possible through SSA. And so even though we don't expect that many of our SSI-only households will be having job income, we've kept all of the job-related questions in place. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes to getting money from other sources. And so when you select that somebody is on SSI or has applied for SSI, we automatically ask how much money do you get from that. So most households that are receiving may be getting around $900 or a slightly lower amount if they happen to have some other income. But you can also put 0 in this field if you are somebody who has applied for SSI but not yet receiving it. And let's say that this person gets a little bit of money from Social Security separately from SSI. Okay. And so we have a review page now where we show the income that somebody has given us, and they have the opportunity to go back and change their answers if they need to. And then asking about expenses for SSI-only households, we want to make sure to ask the medical expense question. We have just a few examples here, but we may be updating this page in the near future to put more examples because we know that there's a lot of potential for people to have medical expense deductions. And so let's say that this household pays $200 for medical expenses every month, and then they also pay rent. And so again, we have a review page there for the expenses. You can go back to change your answers. And then we go on to the last portion, which is submitting your personal information. So one thing that we want to note is that the SSA technician will be essentially reading out each of these pages as written directly to the client. Okay, and let's say that they rent. Our own research shows that many SSI-only households do have stable housing. Okay. And we do have validation on the phone number now, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to show you our test phone number, which we use internally. But every other phone number goes through our validation process. All right. So leave Social Security number blank, although I would expect that SSI-only households would all be putting in a Social Security number. And then you, as an SSA applicant, you do still have the opportunity to sign up for text message reminders for the process. Right now, we will not be sending any campaign messages to clients who apply through SSA, and that's just because most of our campaign messages are related to your interview and your documents, which we expect that most SSI-only households that are applying through SSA won't need to be reminded about. But we may have a special SSA messaging campaign that we'd implement in the future. All right, so now we get to the legal stuff, and there are a few changes that we've made here in order to meet the requirements of SSA's own legal team. One of the changes is that we don't include the privacy policy on this page any longer, but we do refer to it on an information sheet, which SSA will be providing to the applicants after they submit the application. And so those applicants who apply through SSA will have the opportunity to go back and look at the CalFresh privacy policy. The other thing that we have done here is we have kept in the reference to the rights and responsibilities for the CalFresh program, and the SSA technician will be reading these CalFresh rights and responsibilities to the applicants before they go on from this page. And that's just to acknowledge that the rights and responsibilities is a usual part of the CalFresh interview, so we want to make sure that the client gets that information. Okay, And then on the signature page, we have some language here that acknowledges that the SSA technician will be signing on behalf of the applicants and not actually signing this themselves. And then finally, on our confirmation page, we show a different confirmation page for the SSA applicants that lets them know, in this case, you have a standard processing time of 30 days, and to be on the lookout for any calls or notices from the county. Even though there's no required interview, we know that the counties will likely need to follow up with some clients, either to get documents or to get more information, and so we do give that notice. We also send a confirmation text message that has the same information, and that's sent to the client as soon as we successfully submit their application through one of the application systems. And that's about it.
Great. Thank you, Simone. I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen back to the presentation we were sharing and talk more about the electronic indicators to demonstrate how a county is going to be able to identify an application was assisted by SSA. And first, I'm going to start with the CalWIN counties. So on the screen here, you are looking at the external referral window. Rather than the agency key saying Code for America-SC, or I know this varies county by county in the CalWIN counties, we work directly with the CalWIN consortia to identify a new agency key named SSA to easily identify SSA-assisted applications. And again, this will appear in the external referral window, which we know Clerical is already looking at to indicate that these applications will not need an interview. From there, we worked with a handful of CalACES North counties to understand what aspects of kind of an online application did Clerical look at during app registration. We wanted to be really conscious of not increasing the county's workload and doing something that works within their existing kind of day-to-day work. And so we recognize that a typical Clerical member does not have access to a client's username or password. So here what we'll do is update the e-signature to say, rather than Get CalFresh, it will say SSA assisted. And then finally, Los Angeles will be taking a similar approach to the CalWIN counties, where under the user agency, rather than it saying C4A or Code for America, we will also create a new agency key named SSA. Again, we will be able to identify any SSA-assisted applications because they are using that unique URL, so we can ensure that we are submitting them to the county in a way that is very easily able to be identified for Clerical staff. And then finally, as a backup, we also updated our applicant summary. So here on the top right-hand side of the screen, if the application is assisted by SSA, we will explicitly say this application is SSA assisted, no interview required. And just wanted to kind of take a moment and pause and thank a lot of counties who I see on the call today for helping us test this and think through what would be the best experience for both clerical and eligibility workers to ensure, to the best of our abilities, that a client does an interview. With that, I'm going to pause and turn things back over to Alexis, and we will make sure to share these slides out with folks on the call as well.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. So we are going to go ahead and transition to Q&A. And I have already some questions coming in, and we'll go through the policy questions first. And then, Caitlin, I'll let you know when some questions have come in for your team. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to try to do these in somewhat of an order. Let's start with the application submittal process. So the question is, will the SSA transmittal, which is the cover sheet, be used for applications that are submitted via email? So the standard of practice for the paper applications will be to submit by fax if the SSA technician has the ability to submit by email, and it seems like SSA says that spotty. Not all technicians have email access. I don't know how that could be. But they will submit a scanned version of both the paper application and the cover sheet just the same, so that you will know it came from SSA. So the email submission will look similar to the fax submission, and that it's simply a scanned copy of the paper document. Okay. This next question is about the CF-SSA1, which is the new informational sheet. So the second page of the CF-SSA1 has blank fields for the customer's IRT and SAR due month, but this will not be determined until the application is processed. Will these fields be left blank when SSA gives the customer the form? The answer is yes. The idea here is that this client may save their information sheet because it has information for the future, and as they receive their approval notices, they will fill in information that is relevant to their case. How will households that are ESAP and required to report every 12 months be notified that they are not subject to semi-annual reporting? Again, approval notices for ESAP or other related ESAP information still applies for these households when you complete the eligibility determination, and they will complete their periodic report at 12 months versus 6 months. All of the same notices at the eligibility determination point in time. The same notices that go to every household will go to these households. So for example, they are still going to get a SAR2 form generated by the CWD with their IRT amount. And so those business processes related to notices, approval forms have not changed. Okay, here's another one on kind of application submission. How will the CWD be able to determine the date the application is received by SSA? Will there be a date stamp or some other indicator? So for the getcalfresh.org application, you should assume that the date you receive it is the date it was submitted from SSA, because those are real-time submissions made during business hours at SSA. And for the paper application, the SSA technician will be marking the date it was received by SSA on the application or cover sheet. They have assured us that this is something that they do in all other states. Okay. Let me just pause here and see if there are other questions kind of on this category of application submission. So give me a second to review the Q&A that's coming in. Answer that one. Okay, here's a good one. Can an SSI recipient walk into an SSA office just to apply for CalFresh if they do not have any other business to complete that day, or will the SSA refer them to the CWD office? So our understanding of SSA's business operations, and again, we are not SSA, so we're operating on what they've shared with us in terms of their processes, is that the screening and the informing only happens when a client is doing other business with the SSA. That's why those 4 questions are built into the Social Security Administration's application, not in some other alternative process. So if a client walked in and said, I'm here to apply for CalFresh, the likelihood that the front desk staff is going to be able to help them is very low. They will likely be referred back to the county. It is only the technician who can actually complete the joint processing procedures, and so they'd have to be interacting with the technician for other business in order to be assisted with the CalFresh application. So definitely, we don't want folks encouraging our customers to use SSA as the place to apply for CalFresh. They should still do that online, over the phone, or with you in person. Okay. Just give me a second here. I'm kind of combing through to make sure the Get CalFresh questions are together. Okay, here's a good one. How does the SSA technician know the CalFresh household composition consists only of SSI members? So under the joint processing rules and agreements, the SSA technician is supposed to be assessing for the CalFresh purchase and prepare household. And so we have provided them with some training materials. There are some prompts in the getcalfresh.org tool reminding them of how we define our household, but we have entrusted the SSA technician with determining the CalFresh household under joint processing procedures. So they will be completing the application with the information they know about the purchase and prepare household. Okay. All right, here's a question about categorical eligibility. So if the household submits an application via joint processing and the household is not categorically eligible, is residency already verified, or can the CWD contact the household to verify residency? So even if they're not categorically eligible, the SSA technician, again, like the the purchase and prepare household, has the responsibility for adding to the application the address at which the household resides and was used for the SSI application. So when you receive that information, it has been entered by the technician. They have validated it on their end. That's the thinking here, that the SSA technician is doing some of the work of that an EW would do, not all of it because they're not EWs, but they are entering address information that has been used for the SSI application or redetermination process. So it should be considered verified by the SSA technician. You can also go into meds to verify residency, identity. A lot of that double checking, if you wanted to do it, should be information that's available to you, not information that you need to verify with the household. Okay. Here's another question. If the SSA fails to fax the paper application timely and it impacts processing timelines, how is the county to proceed? The county should process that application as soon as possible, but the beginning date of aid is still the date the signed application was received by SSA. If you're seeing trends that your county is receiving faxes late, let us know. We are going to continue to try to have a working relationship with the SSA regional offices, and we'll be kind of addressing these needs or these issues as they arise. So let us know if you're seeing large delays, but as a matter of technicality, the beginning date of aid is still the date it was received by SSA. Okay, here's another one for SSA. Is the SSA technician accepting verbal confirmation that the household has a recertification due? Yes, it is purely based on what the household has told the SSA technician, because as you know, SSA does not have access to your eligibility system, so they're going to have to take the client's word for it. And I should mention here, the letter touches on this, 1944, but basically they will follow the same procedures for recertification. They will not be completing ACS 37 for the client. That is because, first, the likelihood that a client is completing SSA business at the same time that a CalFresh recertification is due is very low. To keep that in mind. And if it were to happen, we would have SSA basically trigger that recertification process by submitting a getcalfresh.org application or 285. SSA's ability to use different forms was assessed to be very low, and so it will be the same process if the household says their recertification is due as if they had said they are not on CalFresh. Okay. Next question is about the interview, so we will go ahead and transition to a couple questions about the interview. Can you clarify if the SSA submits an application on behalf of an SSI applicant, will the CWD be required to conduct an intake interview? So no. Again, I'll reiterate that if an application is submitted through SSA assistant under joint processing procedures, an intake interview cannot be conducted or required to make an eligibility determination. There are a narrow set of circumstances in which you can reach out to the household for additional information. For example, the application is not properly completed, you're missing mandatory verification, information is questionable, or you're proactively reaching out to verify expenses that can increase benefits. Okay. Give us a chance here to go through the questions. Okay. I'm actually going to see, I'm seeing lots of questions on the Get CalFresh demo, so let's transition to some questions about the demo, and then we'll come back to a couple of policy questions. So Caitlin, if you're at the ready, I'll start at the top.
Great.
Okay. So this is a joint question for us both, but if a client doesn't have an email or is not able to receive text messages, are they still able to opt out of providing that information? So that's the first question.
I'm not sure that I understand the question. Opt out of providing which information?
So if a client does not have an email address or is not able to receive text messages, are those fields in the application still optional in the SSA version of Get CalFresh?
I see. Yeah. So right now we do make the assumption that everybody has a phone number, and that is a required field. The email field is optional. I think that if we were to find out that there were a significant number of people who did not have a phone number who were being assisted by SSA, that is a field that we could make optional for the SSA's experience only. But we typically want to make sure that the county has a way to get in touch with the client.
Great. And then the screen where I can choose to receive email updates and text message updates, is that optional?
Yes, that's optional. So you can choose to just press continue on that screen without selecting either of the options there.
Okay. And then the second part of this question I will answer. It talks a little bit about whether the confirmation screen will be only emailed or whether SSA is going to mail the confirmation screen. So let's start, Simone, with on your end, how does a household that uses the Get CalFresh SSA edition receive the confirmation that their application has been submitted?
So right now we send that confirmation to either or both of the phone number and email, whichever one is provided. We will send the confirmation message to that. And if both are provided, we will send the confirmation to both phone number and email. So right now that confirmation message does include the confirmation number.
Okay. All right. Okay. So this next question is about getcalfresh.org, but it's a bit of a policy question. So the question is, on the getcalfresh.org website, will the SSA agent enter in the total SSI income amount, or can they enter separate SSI and SSP payment amounts? And I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and say that the SSA technician will be entering the total payment amount, and if the county wanted to see the split between SSI and SSP, you could see that through the two data elements in the INQX screen. the SSI paid and the SSP paid amount, ultimately, both are considered earned income. So in terms of determining the benefit amount, you have to enter the combined SSI, SSP payment amount, which is why Get CalFresh asks for that total payment amount. Okay, here's one for the Code for America team. You mentioned a validation process for phone numbers. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah, so what that looks like is we use a service called Twilio. That's our service that we use for text messaging. They also have a feature that allows phone number validation. And so we use the Twilio API to validate phone numbers that are entered.
So for example, if an applicant had 7 zeros in the middle of their phone number, we would tell them that that phone number is likely not valid and prompt them to correct that number before proceeding with the application.
Here's another one for the Get CalFresh team. On the address field for the SSA edition of Get CalFresh, will the applicant still be able to use homeless for physical and mailing address?
Yes, they will be able to. So the way that you get to those kind of alternative paths for putting in an address is just based on living situation. If you select that you rent or own, or that you live on campus, then we do ask you for your full address, including a street address. But if you select any of the other options, which are living in a car, living in a shelter, or living outside, then in those cases, we give you a screen to that just asks for your city and your zip code, and then we also give you an option to put in a full mailing address if you have one.
Okay. So this next one is about Get CalFresh. I will take it. So the question is, can a client or the SSA technician leave a page without giving all the information, like the SSN screen that is traditionally an optional screen on getcalfresh.org, the regular version? And the answer is, let me just say yes. And the reason I'll answer this is because, again, it's similar to the residents entering the information. We are setting the expectation that the SSA technician will enter this information. That is the agreement. That's why, for example, you don't see a minimal app option. The SSA technician has this information. They just completed the SSI application or redetermination process, and the expectation is they enter it. So I will say here that as this rolls out, if you're starting to see issues with what is being entered, that is the type of stuff you need to send back up to us at the state and with Get CalFresh so that we can address that with SSA in terms of their technician training. So, I'm not going to promise here that for the first month everything will be perfect in terms of the information input, but I do ask that you send that back to us if you're seeing issues on what's being put into those optional boxes. All right. Do we have Caitlin, this is for you. Do we have a screenshot of what the counties will see on the C4 side when an SSA-assisted application is submitted?
So the application will come through just like any other online or e-app would. We don't have those specific screenshots, but would love to work with the county to help get those, and then we can share that out more broadly if that's something they're open to.
Okay. So I'm going to start going to a couple questions on our side. We'll give Get CalFresh a break and we'll come back to them. So this question is kind of a policy question. Is the county still required to have, now I'm not understanding this. Is the CWD still required to have security questions when contacting Social Security if there is incorrect information if we cannot contact the client? As we will have not have any information on these applicants. So I'm not sure I'm following the question, but I'll start super high level, and I will say that the counties will not contact Social Security to ask questions about these applications. Once the application has been submitted, the SSA is not keeping a record of what they input into the application. They're not keeping a copy of the application. They are simply helping the client complete and submit an application. So if you contact them, they will know nothing about the application or who the applicant was, and they're not going to give you information about them in terms of their SSI status. So please do not contact SSA about these applications. Again, if you're seeing issues, quality issues with the data that's being put in by the SSA technician, please elevate, and again, that will be more of a training issue than anything else, because the technicians are expected to enter information based on what they know about the applicant from their SSI application or redetermination. Okay. This is a policy question again. If the CWD denies an application for an SSI SSP only household that applies through the county for no interview and later receives an SSA assisted application from the same person, is an interview required for this scenario? And the answer is no. That now is an SSA assisted application, and unless there's no interview, and unless it meets some of the reasons for follow-up, such as missing mandatory verifications, questionable information, etc., you do not need to reach out to that household. Okay. When should counties expect the applications? Oh, this is a good one. When should counties expect SSA-assisted applications from getcalfresh.org? Thank you. I should have mentioned that. These procedures do not start until after June 1st. So the first day that SSA would assist anybody with a CalFresh application is June 3rd. So you will not receive SSA-assisted applications before June 3rd. Okay. Give us a second here to go through some additional questions. Okay, so this is a good one. When SSA submits an intake application for an SSI recipient, most likely they will not submit expense verification. So that is correct. Is the CWD mandated to request what is an optional verification when the application is received, or since the expenses are not required to be approved, can the CWD approve the application before allowing the customer 10 days to provide expense verification? So this was a hot topic during the Q&A sessions. It's not really about joint processing, so I just want to make sure you all understand that the issue at hand is for any application that indicates that they have an expense. Let's use the example of a medical expense, but they have not provided the verification. So this is an optional deduction. You cannot hold up an eligibility determination because a client has not provided an optional verification, but if you are requesting the optional verification, you must provide the client 10 days to submit it. So the important thing here is you're not denying an application because an optional verification has not been submitted. If you do request an optional verification, you must provide 10 days to the client to get that back to you. So again, this is really about how you operationalize optional deductions, not about joint processing specifically. So this would apply to any household that indicates they have a expense which is optional in terms of verifying and claiming the deduction. Oops. give me a minute here. We're still getting. So we talked a little bit about when counties will see the SSA assisted indicator. That will be no sooner than June 3rd. Okay, Get CalFresh, here is a question for you. Can you please confirm the agency key for Calwin counties? The presentation displayed a different agency key. If you can just confirm that for us.
Yes, apologies for any confusion. We showed our current agency key in San Diego, but for Calwin counties, they voted and agreed on SSA assisted, no interview required as the agency key.
Okay, here's one for us. So if SSA is going to be assisting SSI customers with completing their recertification, if so, how will SSA do that? So again, very narrow circumstance when SSA will assist someone to complete their recertification. If the client does say, yes, please help me, I don't have my CS37 packet with me, or I have not called the county back, then SSA is going to use the same process and is going to submit either the getcalfresh.org application or the CS285 on paper. We mentioned that the risk assessment here was it's a very narrow number of recertifications, and the likelihood that SSA would be able to track the second type of application led us to decide that they would use the same process, the getcalfresh.org and the 285. On this topic, I think it's a good time to also mention just the scale here so that folks don't panic thinking they're going to be receiving a lot of applications through this mechanism. New York, which has a similarly large caseload, receives from SSI applicants something like 500,000 cases, a year that they carry from SSI applicants. And on a yearly basis, they estimate that they only receive about 2,000 applications statewide through SSA. So I just want people to have a sense of the scope here. It's a relatively narrow. The majority of your SSI applicants and recipients, particularly during initial implementation, are going to come to you, the counties, to complete that application process. And so, again, very narrow. Okay, here's just a question about meds. So I'm going to rephrase this. Can counties use meds to verify identity for SSA joint processing purposes? Yes, so in the letter we mentioned this, but I'll reiterate it here, that counties should follow existing procedures for verifying identity. If you're able to verify identity in meds, which you should be under current procedures, that is the preferred method, not only for cases that are jointly processed, but all cases that come to us. So you're going to use existing identity verification methods for these cases. Okay. So just looking through questions that are coming in, and I will just say now we are not going to get to all these questions. There's a lot pending. So give us a minute here to go through these. So I will have to follow up. I will have to follow up on a couple of these as well because I'm not clear exactly on all the questions. So this next one is about expedited service, and it's a crisscross for the Code for America team. So I think these questions are being asked in the context of the SSA edition, but it's a crossover with the regular getcalfresh.org application, and it has to do with determining that someone would be eligible to expedited service processing. So if you could speak generally to getcalfresh.org and the SSA edition of getcalfresh.org, and why folks are not asked for resource amounts or bank account information, and talk to us about how getcalfresh.org indicates potential expedited service entitlement.
Yeah, so this is Caitlin. CalFresh reviewed the SOS2 Plus and also the CS285 along with ACL 1614 to understand the 3 easy form expedited service questions. And so while you won't see a specific question on GetCalFresh like, is your household's gross income less than $150 and cash on hand, checking and savings accounts $100 or less, we do that math on behalf of the applicant. So you will see us asking, for example, how much money do you have on hand? Also asking if a client has a job, and if so, what their income is, if they have any other sources of income, et cetera, like unearned income. So we do answer those questions within the online application on My Benefits CalWin and Your Benefits Now, and have had many productive conversations with the CalAces, North Counties, and consortia about adding that to see for yourself too. This information is also included in our applicant summary, so you'll see a clear indicator of whether or not someone may be eligible for expedited service.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. And I will, on this kind of topic, say we've received a couple questions that are more generally about GetCalFresh. We'll make sure that those get to the Code for America team and that they're addressed in all the kind of other tandem conversations we're having about the tool. Generally, they're more general than the specific SSA edition, so we will follow up offline on those, and we'll make sure that the Code for America team gets those. At this point, I'm just going to say we have more questions than we're going to be able to answer on the phone today. We will continue reviewing and getting back to folks. It'll be a continued discussion, both use of getcalfresh.org in general, our work with SSA at our monthly county meetings this coming month. And I will just say, to wrap up, as we roll out June 3rd, the most important thing for the counties to communicate to us is, as you start to receive these, whether you're seeing any issues with the data that's being put in, the completeness, if you will, of the applications from SSA. We've been working really closely with them. We've been trying to get involved in their training. We've been kind of offering to them as well that we have regular check-ins after launch to make sure that they're sending user feedback to us and to the Code for America team. So as other users, please do share that information with us. It is a new process. Like any other new process, there will be little kinks in the road, and we need to keep open communication in order to resolve those. So please, the emphasis here is to stay in communication with us as this rolls out. With that, I'm going to remind folks that the slides and a recording will be posted to our website, so you'll be able to access that, and we have the questions logged. So thank you to the Code for America team for joining us today live and sharing that demo, and then thanks to everyone for participating. We had a great turnout. So we will see you all soon, and good luck with the expansion that is well underway.